Okay, we are going to talk about emotionally focused couples therapy. And um, this is a really cool therapy, and hopefully, you've already watched a few of the videos and read some stuff. But this type of therapy was developed by two people. First, Dr. Sue Johnson, who, when she was a graduate student with Dr. Les Greenberg, they were watching many, many hours of recorded therapy, couples therapy, and from that experience, they observed and developed this theory of emotionally focused therapy. Um, Most of the therapy is, well, we'll get to that. Anyway, Dr. Johnson then went on to develop more content and even trainings that she does for other therapists who want to learn more about this specific therapy and how they can become um, capable in using this type of therapy. She's born in England, currently is still a clinical psychologist and lives and works in Canada. She's accomplished many things, and one of the coolest things I think is that what she does is not only just based in teaching other therapists, but that she has even published a book called Hold Me Tight, which is really directed towards the general public in helping the lay people understand more of EFT in their own individual lives and how they can learn more about their own needs and cycles and how to have healthier relationships. Um, One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Johnson is emotional responsiveness is the key defining element of love, with emotional responsiveness being tuning into and supporting the other. So watch for that in the examples that you watch of Dr. Johnson doing therapy or others using emotionally focused therapy is really tuning into yourself and supporting the other is a way to show love. So let me see if I can move my face. You can see a little bit more over here. So what is EFT? One of the biggest components is that it's a humanist approach, meaning that it's very positive view towards both an individual, that humans are good, that relationships are inherently good, and that they're just snags that come along the way to detract from that goodness and that wholeness. EFT in general is a shorter term therapy, typically lasting between 8 to 20 sessions. And from what I've read, the difference in that is really based more in the experience of the therapist, not necessarily the severity of conditions that a couple or individual might have. Mostly EFT is directed towards couples, and there are those who also use EFT for individuals or families with slight modifications. You can even become certified in using EFT for individuals. There's different methodology and also for families. But in general, we're going to talk about couples and how emotionally focused couples therapy is the real key to this presentation today. Um, a huge background besides the humanist part of EFT is attachment theory. Um, because Dr. Johnson is a clinical psychologist, her training had backgrounds also in attachment theory. And attachment theory really came about in an understanding of how young children or infants are attached to parental figures, specifically mothers. Um, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about attachment theory in a minute as far as the different styles of attachment and how that affects people. But a huge part of what Dr. Johnson and Greenberg did was discover that attachments really are not just specific to young children and a mother figure, but really all humans in all phases of life are needing to feel safe and connected and attached to it within relationships in order to have healthy experiences with those relationships. Another part is experiential therapy. Again, this is within the therapy, individuals and couples are able to have experiences that can help build better healthier relationships. And then systems theory is also a piece of that. EFT is unique in that it is an evidence-based therapy. It's been studied for over 30 years, developed in the 80s, and because something that's unique about it is it's manualized, meaning that there are very specific steps. Because of that, then it's easier to have scientific studies done, and EFT has been proven very effective and to have positive results in couples and individuals. So that is something that's really amazing and unique to EFT. Um, Within EFT, with the humanist approach, it's assumed that couples and individuals are good and wholesome, and that to be healthy, a relationship needs to be able to be flexible. People would need to be flexible emotionally, and when people are more rigid or stuck, then there we see these cycles that are unhealthy, that things aren't working the way that couples would want, and it's having effects on their relationship and can even have effects individually for those people within that relationship that is struggling. So we're going to look more into these cycles here. I'm going to move this just for a second. This is going to say pursuing partner and withdrawing partner. This is a page developed by Scott Woolley, who took some of these same EFT principles and showed how a cycle might actually work. Within EFT and within other therapies too, there's this idea of having a pursuer and a withdrawer, and that typically there's a partner who's the pursuer or withdrawer, and that sometimes they can even switch spots along in the cycle. But what I think is most interesting is that, similar to Satir's idea of the iceberg, that this almost looks that same way. You can see above the line it says what you see on the surface, and then what's below the surface, looking at words such as behaviors and secondary emotions. And then below the surface, we see primary emotions, unmet attachment needs. And this is a huge part of understanding EFT. So I wanted to talk through this just real quickly. If we look over in the pursuing partner on the left side, shows behavior as criticizes or attacks. That would be a behavior that might be common for a pursuer. Pursuing is then the one who is looking to have these conversations, and the withdrawer obviously is shutting down, is pulling back. And each of them are having those thoughts. And then the secondary emotion is more of a reactionary emotion. So if you're attacking and criticizing, the pursuer is probably feeling anger or frustration in this case, and the withdrawer then is going to pull back, might feel frustrated, but also going to numb out, just check out. And then, but that's just the top. That's the surface of what we see, and that's what helps keep us feeling safer in these moments. But within EFT, not only would we start to want to discover and see what a behavior is and what a secondary emotion is, but really the key would be to get to those attachment needs. So we can see here that maybe the pursuer might be feeling a need to be loved or need to feel important. That they could both be feeling that, and instead of being able to recognize that and share that, which might be scary, especially if you're in a moment where you're feeling attacked, then those primary emotions of fear, failure, sadness, disappointment, abandon, pain, we're going to kind of cover those up, and then instead of actually recognizing those emotions and sharing those emotions verbally, then we have those other secondary emotions and behaviors that appear. So we're going to kind of look through this, and as you've watched other videos or read some other readings, hopefully some of those teachings kind of come back, and it's going to be important that we're going to refer to the cycle and tracking the cycle. That's a part of what would happen in an EFT session. So kind of keep this image in your mind, and we're going to talk a little bit more. I want to ask some questions for you guys. Reflection question about pursuing and withdrawing. There are different ways that might play out, but that's the basic overview of how that works. So let's talk a little bit more about secondary and primary emotions. Like I mentioned, secondary emotion is what's going to show up first. It's the reactive. So when something comes at you, it's the immediate response. Could, like we said, anger, frustration, jealousy, anxiety, resentment. it reminded me of the concept of Satir's feelings about feelings. So we have those deeper feelings, but what are we actually feeling about those things? We're not feeling comfortable in them. And what happens with those secondary emotions is that it's going to pull a couple apart. It's going to push them apart because we're going to have those reactions. And very rarely are those going to be helpful and bonding. Whereas opposed to if we can get to a place of feeling of safety within a therapy session with an EFT therapist, if the therapist has helped set up that safety and has validated the couple along the way, each member might start to be willing to dig a little deeper to get down to those primary emotions, which, as it shows, represent attachment, fear of needs, those more vulnerable emotions, more intimate, definitely, and would be harder to share if you were feeling judged or attacked or threatened in any way. Those primary emotions might show up as loneliness, sadness, fear, shame, a fear of being unloved, unwanted, or inadequate. And as you've probably seen in these various snippets of other sessions, those primary emotions, if they're shared, if a person can get to a point where they do feel safe to share those, it's a very vulnerable place. And almost always their partner is going to feel uh, a love, an appreciation for someone sharing that very special, almost sacred, intimate part. And then those primary emotions, when it's shared in appropriate ways, are going to draw partners closer together, which is so interesting because we would first think if I share this really, sensitive, vulnerable part of me, we fear that it's actually going to push somebody away. And so it actually does the opposite. Those primary emotions are going to bond the couple together. And so it's important that we're able to get to that part as opposed to staying in the secondary blaming and reactive place. Problems, this is from the book, from Linda Metcalf's book. Problems in a relationship occur when people are not able to enact their attachment needs, not able to perceive their partner's need in a secure way. And then we're going to see, as we've kind of already started to discuss, a self-reinforcing feedback loop of these negative experiences, negative emotions that says, I'm not safe, I can't share these things, this, I'm not loved, my partner doesn't care about me, this is not a strong relationship. And so as those perpetuate, there are these problems. And so then maybe a couple would come in for help or for seeking someone else to help. A reflection question I wanted to ask, as we talked real quickly about pursuers and withdrawers, is if you can think of a relationship, whether it be with a roommate or a sibling or a spouse or a companion on a mission, whatever, have you tended to be more of a pursuer or withdrawer in that specific relationship? And a follow-up to that, after you see how this cycle kind of plays out, do you feel like you're able to see the other person's perspective differently? Why maybe they were more of a pursuer or a withdrawer, vice versa? So take a minute to kind of think about that. EFT, although it's fantastic and evidence-based and all, is not necessarily for everyone, not appropriate for all couples. Because it is this very vulnerable and intimate form of therapy, it's important that if a couple has experienced abuse, physical or emotionally, or if there's untreated addictions, this is not an appropriate therapy for them. So we're going to talk in just a minute, but this is something that's important to understand, that although it is very effective for those for whom it is appropriate, there are also those who are not. So the way that this would play out is first the couple would come in, right? They're presenting a problem. They would talk with a therapist. There would be a couples session. And then before moving forward, there would be individual sessions. In an individual session, there would be an attachment history that would take place for each individual. As you see over in that image, within attachment theory, there are various types of attachments. Obviously, we're trying to get to secure, but many times there are avoidant attachments. and also those with anxious attachment or fearful. And it's more common that with avoidant attachment, you would see withdrawer, and with anxious, you would see more of a pursuer, wanting to be attached but not feeling secure in those ways. So there, a therapist would go through each individual with their attachment history from childhood, and even from previous relationships, romantic or otherwise, and then in their current relationship, what's their attachment history, if there's any attachment trauma, with whether that's with specifically if that's within the current relationship, that would be important to know. And then a therapist would need to understand the commitment level of each person and could do that maybe more effectively in an individual session. If a couple is really not invested emotionally in repairing a relationship, then again, it's not an appropriate form of therapy. And again, that would be a place where undisclosed affairs or addictions could be discussed and determine, again, probably that EFT would not be appropriate in those moments. Once individual sessions are done and that attachment history is discovered, then go back to couple sessions. And that's then where we're going to learn a little bit more about the process of change and how a therapist would approach once determining those attachment styles. So, in EFT, there are 3 stages of change, and I am not going to go into deep. We've already heard some explanation of these steps over on the right side, but I wanted to just briefly give kind of an overview. It feels like there's a lot of words on the page, and hopefully just talking through real steps could help kind of clarify. So the first stage, as you see, is de-escalation of negative cycles. And basically, once a therapist has gathered the couple, we've done the attachment history, then it's important to make sure that the couple feels safe, that the therapist is a safe place, and that the sessions will be a safe place as well to have a therapeutic alliance and then an alliance with one another as well. And then a therapist could ask questions to kind of say what do you guys, where are the issues? And most often there's going to be a cycle that comes out. And so along the way, and observing, the therapist is going to be able to identify. So we're going to identify the cycles and then take them down. And in order to do that, we have to be able to first identify what they are, share that with the couple, and then teach about secondary and primary emotions. And so along the way, they're able to kind of understand, and then you guys can make goals. So once those negative cycles are identified and calmed down, then we can change interactional patterns and engagements, which means we're going to practice. This is the experiential part. And so a therapist could help guide and kind of be a a teammate in helping identify and recognizing and identifying emotions, primary, secondary, and primary, and do some digging to get to a place where then, as emotions are identified and shared in safe ways and validated in those moments, that then we're having different experiences that a couple can use throughout the therapy sessions and then also be able to recreate at home. So that would really be more of stage 2. And then stage 3 is coming up with new solutions. So we're practicing all of these things and couples can use them on their own. Something that I think is really interesting is that even though this is super manualized, as far as like there are steps to take that therapists are taught to follow and cues to look for, that really it might not be a linear, it might not go step 1, step 2, step 3 down to step 9. And there could be some going back and forth in between these different steps and might need to jump back for a minute back to stage 1 before moving back on to other steps in further stages. So just to be fluid, to be open to what needs to be happening within a session and overall within the therapeutic experience. Some of the interventions, Dr. Garrett described using some of these interventions in the first stage, meaning the de-escalating, the identifying stage, and suggested that interventions such as validation. So I we see so many of these interventions used by Dr. Johnson just so fluidly. And really, more than anything, you see that she's so invested in the couple, in the experience, in each individual. And you see that physically. She reaches over and she touches, and the way that she looks with her eyes and her body language says, I'm here, I'm with you, share what you want to share, and then reflects that back with phrases such as, oh, that would be really hard, or is this what you're feeling, and letting a individual clarify along the way. So reflecting those emotions all the way along, there's this tracking of the cycle and saying, oh, it seems like this is happening, and do you feel like this is true? Reflecting emotions, oh, I feel this way, is that how you feel? Empathetic conjecture, evocative responding, just using lots of emotion. The therapist being able to first identify emotions in others, in their own emotions, and then sharing and making it acceptable to have those emotions, to share those emotions. So those are really the ones in the first part. And then the second, in the restructuring and the intervention, in the experiential portion of interventions, then we have enactments, which is not the first time we've heard that. So enactments, practicing those. Would you be able to share that? And, let's practice saying this to each other and things like that. Let's have this conversation. And when you do that, can you share why you feel that way, or what really is your fear at that point? Heightening is really just getting emotions higher and higher till we can then express them and dig deeper and recognize them. Reframing, again, is not a new concept to us, but taking the issue and seeing it in a new way, and then replaying those interactions. So slowing down the cycle and practicing along the way, which might sound kind of canned or corny, but as you see Dr. Johnson do it, and I'm sure there's others who are very well trained as well, that it feels like it's so natural. And so really owning, for a therapist to really own their own emotional experience and be totally present, which really goes along with the last point here, which is creating feelings of safety that will allow exploration of primary and secondary emotions. So much of these things, exploring emotions and practicing those and validating and mentioning all of those different parts of the cycle, reflecting those emotions, these are words to really just describe being invested in being there and being able to see and be aware of what cycles are happening, and helping in supportive ways to slow those down and practice how to identify those underlying attachment needs in clear ways. So I am so sorry I keep having to move this back and forth. Who benefits from EFT? We talked about this, but really couples who are emotionally invested, who are willing to do the work and to dig deep and to have vulnerable, intimate moments. Because as we see here, the payoff is exceptionally high. 90% reported significant improvement in their relationship, which is unbelievable and really amazing selling point for EFT. But it's going to be very vulnerable getting there. Before we finish, wanted to talk about a case conceptualization. So let's imagine that we have this family, Teresa and James. They've been married for 18 years. They have two daughters, a 14-year-old named Sarah and a 10-year-old named Lizzie. James has been very successful at work and recently was asked to be the bishop at church. Teresa has also recently gone back to work, but for the sake of this story, we're going to pretend like she went back to work before he was asked to be the bishop. Sarah has been experiencing high levels of anxiety and depression, only exacerbated during COVID. It sounds like this great family that are doing really well, successful at work, successful, looking like they're participating in great things at church as well. But at home, they're having a hard time. And it seems like as they come in, James shares that he doesn't feel appreciated at home. And therefore, he looks for validation at work and church. he feels constantly corrected at home and disengages. He's typically the pursuer. Teresa feels like she's taking care of everything and resents James for putting so much attention outside the home. She feels like she can't say that because he is doing good things, helping others, and she typically is the withdrawer. So it would be interesting in individual sessions to learn more about James and his attachment style. Um, I would probably assume that it would be more of an anxious style. It looks like he's looking for attachment everywhere. He's looking for attachment at home, not getting it. He's looking for validation, for praise, for connection at work, at church. And he's having a hard time feeling anxious in his relationship with his wife, who feels like she's pulling back. So it would be appropriate to have conversations with them and kind of have them have a conversation and say what brought you in. Maybe it was, something along the lines of, since he was called to be bishop, things have just gotten really difficult, and James isn't sure why. He feels like he's trying at home and just getting no response, or getting shut down, or being corrected all the time. If Teresa had been home, a stay-at-home mom for multiple years, most of their daughter's lives to this point, then maybe she had specific ways of wanting to do it, because if he was gone all the time, then she might have had to compensate and felt like she had to take care of those things. That was her responsibility, and had certain ways of doing things. And so if it wasn't working, if he came home and tried something different, maybe she felt like that was her way of, that was her place, that was her job, and so maybe felt like she needed more control there. There could have been some resentment that he was gone all the time, it sounds like, and that as maybe she shares that, before they went back to work, before she went back to work, that they kind of had a conversation about needing to share more, and that she would need to let him have other experiences and lead more. And she shared that she would be okay with that. And then as things went and he was called to be bishop slightly after that, then maybe she resents it, more responsibilities fell back onto her. There could be also a feeling, a withdrawal feeling, a guilty feeling that maybe she feels because she can't say that, right? She's supposed to be supportive of her husband being the bishop, but that then, as their daughter is going through therapy, if there could, maybe she's expresses feeling resentment that her husband is spending time with others and other teens, and when their daughter, she feels like, needs more attention and help. And so there could be resentment there, and those would just be the secondary emotions, right? And so as a therapist, created a safe environment and shared, man, that all sounds really hard. How do you guys end up, how does it work when Teresa's at work, or what happens when James is up doing church stuff, and something's falling apart at home, and kind of watch for this cycle back and forth of stepping back. It sounds like it could even be that as James pursues, and then as Teresa withdraws, he says, well, why won't you, what's wrong? And she says, oh, nothing. And then maybe she would come back and just say, well, you just never help. Like, kind of dig at the surface level, when really it could be something so much deeper of, I'm not, maybe Teresa's feeling that I'm not enough for you. You're always looking elsewhere to share your time and your attention, even though it's good things, that she really just doesn't feel loved and appreciated for all that she does. And if she would be able to get to that point sharing that, then I would imagine that James as well could come back and say, oh, I just feel like I'm not worth enough because I see you doing so much for our family, and I just am not able to engage the same way with our daughters that you are. You have such a closer relationship. I'm afraid that you resent that you don't love me because I'm not who you want me to be. And so, as digging down to those bottom layers, those primary emotions, could really expose some of those concerns that they're feeling deep down inside, and can find ways to identify those pains and those fears, and see that, appreciate each other for where they're at. I think they would be ideal candidates for something like EFT, Seems like they're invested in each other, that if they could feel safe sharing those very vulnerable, intimate parts of themselves and those understand more of their own underlying unmet attachment needs, and then be able to support each other through those things once they've shared that they could really draw closer and have experiences in this phase of life where they're feeling disconnected. So, um, this is an introduction to EFT. I hope that there were some things that were helpful and applicable that you could use in your own lives as you understand more of your own patterns in how you have relationships with others, and just to be able to use that insight to um, just be more aware of yourself and have stronger relationships because of that. Thank you.